what's better than maxing out your 401k match? Well, if you're tired of these basics and are ready to get on to bigger and better things in regards to your retirement plan, then get out your laptop and log into your account, because you'll definitely want to take advantage of some of the steps that we're about to go into as we go beyond the basics.
So before we get into the next level, let's talk about what got you here to begin with. I think it's important that you understand what those basics were first, so we don't get the cart before the horse. So talked about the 401k match, but let's talk about some other things. Your emergency fund, is it topped off? What we mean by that is, do you have 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses saved and set aside in safekeeping in case you need it? Second thing is, do you have enough life insurance to cover your liabilities, replace your income, and satisfy your final expenses and your last wishes? This is one that we tend to find people aren't ready for. They think they are. This is probably the one that gets the most, well, I've got this one down, and we go, actually, it's not quite enough. And we've talked about why. Well,
I think it's just, it's a very important topic, kind of like you said, but it's just not a very sexy topic, you know, because for most people, they don't want to think about the money that they're not going to be able to use, right? This is money that nobody's going to see unless you are no longer in the picture. Unless you die. So.
And then the last thing is non-mortgage debt. So have you paid off all of your non-mortgage debt? And if you haven't, think about how much this is costing you. So you recently shared someone with a car note that you told us about when we were doing our planning. Talk through that a little bit.
Yeah. So recently met somebody that we were talking about, you know, they were really wanting to know what they should be investing in. And so as we got to talking, I did this exact same thing that we're doing right now, kind of going through just the basics and making sure, okay, before, you know, we talk about investments, before we do anything like that, let's make sure that you're covering your basics first. So as we did that, we talked a little bit about their non-mortgage debt, and he told me that he had a car note, and I said, okay, you know, that definitely not a bad thing. You know, what is the interest rate on that car note? And he told me that it is 17%.
I literally have not heard anything that high in so incredibly long.
Yes, I was shocked. I thought it was going to be maybe like 7 or 8.
That's like credit card rates.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And I mean, thankfully, it wasn't a very big balance, and he actually has money in his savings to be able to, you know, pay it off if he wants to. So that was great. So anyway, I was just, you know, telling him, well, you know, if you pay that off, it's basically like getting a 17% return on, you know, the balance of that loan. So, you know, that's some of the things that we want to make sure that you're covering and that you're knowledgeable on before kind of taking another step and kind of, like you said, putting the cart before the horse.
Yes. So you've got your emergency fund in place. You've got your life insurance in place, along with other coverages too, making sure you have enough car insurance, homeowners insurance, all of that. You've taken care of your non-mortgage debt. You've been doing the employer match. Now what?
Yeah. Now is the exciting part, right? This is kind of like what we all really, really enjoy getting into. And it's a really rewarding feeling, I got to say. Whenever I, after college, I definitely had some credit card debt and some student loan debt that I was, you know, having to pay off. Had a car. I had recently been in a car accident, so I had to get a new car and had to get a car loan. And you know, before all was said done, it had been about 5 or 6 years before I, you know, had paid things off and was able to actually start, you know, contributing to a retirement plan and really kind of being able to maximize it, right? Kind of like what we're talking about today. So, you know, if you already have these other steps down, then perfect. We are really, really excited for you. And some of the things that we think that you should definitely consider, one is, you know, switching your contributions from, if they are pre-tax right now, then consider switching that to an after-tax contribution. Some people call this a Roth contribution. However, there are some considerations to this as well. So the main thing, Teresa, is taxes, right?
When you're dealing with Roth versus traditional, or the after-tax versus pre-tax, the biggest thing to understand is the impact to your taxes when you file them the next year. So if you typically are putting, you know, say $10,000 a year into your employer plan and you're doing it in that pre-tax part, it's lowering the amount of taxes you owe at the end of the year. if you use the Roth option for your contributions, it's not going to lower your taxable income. So if you tend to get a big refund, this is a great step you could take, because there's a kicker later on I'm going to tell you about in just a second. But if you tend to pay in, you really need to talk with your CPA or tax preparer first. So let's talk about that difference, though, because that's why. So people go, why should I care? Why should I use Roth? What's the difference?
Yeah. So the main difference is that if you are currently contributing to a pre-tax 401k, for example, then when you reach retirement, every single dollar that you take out of that account is going to be taxable income, meaning that you're going to have to pay taxes on it. And so if you are even in a 10-20% tax bracket, that means that you're going to be paying 10 cents or 20 cents on the dollar for every dollar that you take out of the account.
Whereas if you utilize that Roth option, when you retire, every dollar goes straight in your pocket for spending. So you can make your retirement dollars stretch further. The employer match is always going to be pre-tax, so you'll still have some pre-tax monies. But if you have the wiggle room to use the Roth option, if it is available to you in your employer plan, we certainly encourage you to consider it and decide if it's right for you.
Yeah. And I love what you said as far as, if you're currently getting a pretty big return, then that's typically a good indicator of, okay, yeah, I can do this.
You can tolerate this.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of take that on. However, if you are, not really getting a return, a big tax return, and you kind of like where your withholding is, then something else that you could consider is maybe just adding another % of deferral from your salary and making that extra % a Roth contribution. That way you are increasing, those after-tax dollars.
And it's really important to understand the goal. The goal is to fully fund your 401k, and you can put a lot of money out of your own pocket into it and get your match to maximize those dollars. We encourage people to consider increasing by 1, 2, 3% every single year once you've gotten those other steps taken care of. But if you've got more wiggle room, go ahead and bump that up. I've had clients jump from doing just the match to putting in 15% because they had the wiggle room in their budget now that they'd paid off debt. And it helped them prevent that lifestyle inflation that we see so much, where it's like, okay, I've paid off this debt. I'm just going to increase my spending and absorb it into everything else. It's really beneficial to you if you will proactively go ahead and change your contributions so your net dollars to the household aren't changing drastically and you're not just absorbing it into the budget.
Yeah, and that also kind of plays into just the impact of automating your savings, right? If you kind of keep that out of sight, then it's going to be something that you can continue on a consistent basis. And ultimately, I mean, we see all the time just the tremendous impact that has on people's lives.
Yes, if the money doesn't hit the bank, they don't miss it. But if that money hits the bank and then they're asked to save it, a lot of times it's harder to make that decision. Another thing you can do is consider an IRA, so a personal retirement account, in addition to your employer plan. You can do either Roth or traditional. There's some income requirements you've got to meet there to be able to write those off. But especially if your employer has a lot of limitations. In some cases, employer plans only have a handful of accounts or a handful of investments, that you can utilize. So if that's the case, rather than maxing out the employer plan immediately, using an IRA where you have more bandwidth to invest might actually be a great tool as well.
Yeah. And this could be really, really useful. For example, if you have an employer plan that currently doesn't offer a after-tax option, right? So that could be another big opportunity. Is if you don't have that after-tax option, then you could consider, after you max out your match, going and putting some dollars into a Roth IRA.
Correct. So the next thing you may want to consider is an HSA if you have one available through your employer. Not all employers have these, but the really cool thing about an HSA is it follows you into retirement. So you can use that to pay towards medical premiums in retirement or medical expenses in retirement, and you can build it over time. One little trick that we've talked about in the past that I want to make sure you understand about HSAs, you can invest them, but I encourage you to treat at least a portion of it like an emergency fund and keep it in cash. That out-of-pocket max that you might be liable for in a given year, keep that part in cash and only invest the difference as you build that one up.
Yeah. And I also wanted to make the important distinction between an HSA and an FSA. So the HSA, the health savings account, is the one that you can save if you are in a high deductible medical plan. So that is a requirement, and you can be on it. You can also have your family on it, and if your family's on it, you can actually contribute more to that HSA. but it is very different from a flexible spending account or an FSA. With FSAs, you kind of have some restrictions on the timing of when you can use those funds. Typically, you have to use them up by the end of the calendar year.
Yes, and there's a little bit of wiggle room past the end of the year, but it's a use it or lose it, even though it's your money, which is the part that's a little tricky. You've got to make sure you don't just leave funds sitting in it.
Yes. So again, there's that requirement to have a high deductible medical plan, but like Teresa said, it is something that will go on with you even if you leave the employer, even if you retire. So it's a great use for medical expenses.
Yes, and if you're doing all of that and you go, okay, great, I'm already doing all of that. It's time to get with a financial advisor and really talk about your goals and set some new spaces for you. There's a lot of ways to reach where you want to go, but you've got to know where it is first.
Right.
You've got to make that roadmap. So getting with your advisor to plan your goals is so much more critical when you get to this stage than, early on, you're putting towards your IRA, you're putting towards your employer plan, but the closer you get to retirement, the more you need to really dig down and define those goals. Yeah.
And there's a lot of strategies that you can really use and exercise kind of all of your options at that point. So yeah, it's a tremendous opportunity there to get with a professional to identify those strategies. So especially if you're thinking about the folks that are getting closer to retirement, like you said, if you're in your 50s, then there's other strategies that you can really take advantage of. Mainly the ones that kind of come to mind are considering using a long-term care insurance product to cover that risk. As you get into your 50s, that is what we believe is one of the optimum times to do this, because you'll typically have a much lower cost. And if you wait further, and you also typically in those years don't have as many health problems as you would have down the line.
Correct. Because if you're going to use a coverage option to plan ahead for long-term care, you've got to be able to qualify.
Right.
And so when you're in your 50s, you're more likely to get qualified. You're also more likely to be able to afford it on an ongoing basis. And there's a bunch of different ways to handle that, but planning ahead in your 50s makes a lot of sense. The other thing that people may not know is that when you hit 50, the year that you're turning 50, you can add more to both your employer plan and your IRA on an ongoing basis from that point forward. They have what are called catch-up contributions.
Yeah, and these are huge. Because if you consider, for example, your 401k, right, for this year, 2023, we have a maximum contribution limit of $22,500 if you're under 50. But if you're over 50, then that adds another $7,500. So you can actually contribute $30,000 to your 401k.
And in most cases, you're in your highest earning years in your 50s. Your children, if you're not like me and had them late, are coming off the payroll. So you've got more disposable income that you can apply to this and play a little bit of catch up if you are a little behind. So getting with that advisor, talking through your options and making sure you're maximizing what you can in those years is really important.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you have those high rate mortgages, we're going to see more and more of those now, right?
Yes.
Tackle them.
Yeah.
Use this free income now to tackle that before you're entering retirement. Not saying you got to have it paid off, but having it paid down is really smart.
Yeah. And again, this is kind of like as a last step. If you've said, okay, yep, check on everything else, right? Which if you do, then man, my hat's off to you, because you're doing things really well. But yeah, I would say that's kind of like that last step, that okay, if everything is good, then, and if you've got those high interest rate mortgages, then that's a good place to then go ahead and use that excess income.
Because as you've seen, when we're doing planning, we can plan for a mortgage in retirement. It's something we can plan around. We can't plan for not having enough assets overall.
Yeah.
So that's really important to make sure you've got that part of it taken care of before you worry about some of these other details, because we can plan around those.
Yeah.
So it's time for our 2 cents, and I'm going to go first. If you are in this situation where you're going, okay, I've got the basics down, congratulations. You've worked hard. You've earned this. Great job. Now, let's get you focused on what comes next and make sure you're taking the steps to take that rewarding feeling even into retirement and enjoy true financial independence.
Yeah, and don't stop there, right? So take an additional step each year, line out kind of your goals, using this list that we've put here together for you to say, okay, I want to accomplish this by this time, right? And seeing yourself down the line, which will bring you closer and closer to financial independence. So that's it for us today. If you learned something new that brings you closer to financial independence, then please give us a like and share. That way you can help others to do the same. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Talking Sense. And if you like what you hear, make sure and subscribe to the podcast to get all the newest episodes.
The Jim Wealth team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com, or you can call our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526.
And while we like to have fun here, we're also financial advisors, and that means disclosures. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success.
Jim Wealth Financial Advisors is an Arkansas registered investment advisor with securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC.